So far in this exploration, we've seen how truth gradually becomes part of identity. Individuals and communities begin to recognize themselves through the stories they tell and the convictions they hold. But once a truth is recognized and named, something else begins to happen. People gather around it. They try to preserve it, protect it, pass it on, and make sure it doesn't disappear. Over time, this effort naturally gives rise to institutions. And these institutions aren't always created simply to control people. Often, they begin as something more humble, vessels of memory. They exist because human beings realize that truth can be fragile. Memories fade, stories are forgotten, cultures change. Without some form of structure, much of what we learn might simply vanish. But something interesting happens when truth becomes entrusted to institutions. A quiet transformation begins. Preserving truth requires decisions. Decisions require interpretation. And interpretation, whether we like it or not, involves influence and power. Even when exercised with the best intentions, those who guard truth also help shape how that truth is understood, and who is privy to it and who is not. In a sense, the guardians of truth inevitably become its interpreters. We can see this dynamic in many traditions throughout history. In the Hebrew tradition, for example, scribes devoted immense care to preserving sacred texts that eventually formed the Hebrew Bible. Their work was patient and reverent. Every letter mattered. The goal was to protect the memory of a people and their relationship with the divine. Later, within Rabbinic Judaism, something remarkable developed. Preservation did not stop with copying text. Interpretation became an ongoing conversation. The Talmud, which records generations of discussion among rabbis, shows this beautifully. Instead of pressing a single frozen answer, it often preserves multiple viewpoints and dialogue with each other. In this way, safeguarding truth became a living practice. The text remained sacred, but understanding it required continued reflection. In the Christian tradition, we encounter another perspective through the teachings attributed to Yeshua of Nazareth. In one passage of the Gospel of Matthew, he acknowledged the authority of religious teachers while also warning about a potential danger. He says that the scribes and Pharisees sit in the seat of Moses, and therefore people should listen to what they teach. But he also cautions that their actions do not always match their words. This statement reveals a tension that still feels familiar today. Institutions may preserve important teachings, yet the people within those institutions remain human. Authority may carry truth forward, but it does not guarantee its integrity. Respect for the role of guardianship exists alongside a reminder that conduct still matters. A similar balance appears in the Buddhist tradition. Siddhartha Gautama entrusted his teachings, the Dharma, to a community known as the Sangha. This community of practitioners preserved the teachings through memorization, discussion, and shared practice. The Sangha became the living environment in which the teachings could survive and spread. Yet even there, we find an important instruction. In teachings recorded near the end of the Buddha's life, followers are encouraged to evaluate teachings carefully and not rely solely on authority or reputation. The truth of a teaching should be examined and confirmed through understanding and experience. In other words, the institution helps preserve the teaching, but the teaching itself remains the ultimate measure. Taoist thought offers another perspective on this relationship between truth and structure. In the Tao Te Ching, we find a gentle warning about the dangers of too much regulation. The text suggests that when societies multiply rules and prohibitions excessively, they may unintentionally create the very problems they hope to prevent. The insight is subtle but powerful. Structure is necessary, but when control becomes too rigid, it can disrupt the natural balance it was meant to protect. Even in the world of Greek philosophy, we see how institutions formed around the preservation of knowledge. Plato established the academy in Athens, and Aristotle later founded the Lyceum. These schools were not just places where individuals gathered to talk. They were early attempts to create lasting centers of learning where ideas could be studied, refined, and transmitted to future generations. In these spaces, philosophy began to take on a more organized shape. Inquiry continued, but it now operated within certain methods and frameworks. Once again, we see the same pattern. Preserving knowledge also means shaping how it is studied and understood. Centuries later, medieval universities in Europe carried this process even further. Fields such as theology, law, and philosophy were organized into formal disciplines. Scholars developed systems for teaching, debating, and transmitting knowledge across generations. This was a remarkable achievement. Without institutions like libraries, monasteries, and universities, much of the world's intellectual and spiritual heritage might have been lost. At the same time, formal structures also introduced boundaries. Certain interpretations became widely accepted, while others faded into obscurity. Preservation brought stability, but it also quietly shaped a range of ideas that could flourish. When we look closely, we see that institutions rarely begin with harmful intentions. Most of the time, they arise from caring. People recognize that truth, wisdom, and knowledge can easily be forgotten. They build structures to protect what they value. Libraries safeguard books. Monasteries preserve manuscripts. Universities maintain traditions of scholarship. Councils gather to clarify teachings. All of these efforts express a deeply human desire, the desire to remember what matters. Yet stewardship is never completely neutral. Each generation must interpret its inheritance it receives. Decisions about translation, interpretation, doctrine, and curriculum all shape how truth will be encountered in the future. Even something as simple as deciding which text to preserve and which to leave aside can influence centuries of understanding. In this way, institutions do more than pass truth along. They participate in its ongoing formation. Recognizing this fact invites humility. No institution, no matter how respectful or ancient, can claim full possession of truth. Every institution operates within a particular historical moment and cultural perspective. Those who guard truth are also participants in the same evolving story. This means guardianship is both admirable and delicate. Institutions help protect wisdom from disappearing, yet they must remain aware of their own limitations. When we look across traditions, a consistent pattern appears. In Rabbinic Judaism, preservation is paired with continual interpretation. In Christianity, councils and creeds attempt to clarify doctrine while debate continues. In Buddhism, teachings are transmitted carefully but remain open to examination and experience. In Taoist thought, the risk of excessive control are gently questioned. In Greek philosophy, schools are later universities. Knowledge is organized while inquiry continues. These examples suggest something important. Institutions are not the enemies of truth, but they are not its final authorities either. They are participants in its unfolding life. One way to understand this through a simple metaphor. Institutions can function like vaults, or they can function like vessels. A vault assumes truth is something fixed that must be locked away and protected from change. A vessel, on the other hand, assumes truth is something living that must be carried carefully through time. A vessel protects what it holds, but it also moves. It adjusts to the currents around it while still safeguarding its contents. When we look at the arc of human history, it becomes clear how important these vessels have been. Sacred texts survived exile and migration. Philosophical traditions endured long after their founders passed away. Entire fields of knowledge developed through centuries of study. These accomplishments deserve genuine respect. They show the depth of humanity's desire to protect what is meaningful and pass it forward. Yet if truth is alive, we have been exploring, then preservation cannot be the final goal. Institutions must remain capable of renewal. They must allow room for correction, deeper insight, and growth. Without that openness, preservation can slowly turn into something else, fossilization. A living tradition remembers its past while also acknowledging that its understanding may continue to develop. In the end, this reflection brings us back to responsibility. Earlier we considered how identity forms around truth. Now, we see that identity also interacts with the institutions that carry those truths across generations. To participate in that process ethically requires a kind of balance. Institutions deserve gratitude for the wisdom they have preserved. At the same time, they must be approached with discernment, remembering that no structure can fully contain the depth of truth. The story then continues to unfold. Truth is not sealed away inside institutions. It is carried by them, interpreted through them, and sometimes challenged by them. Guardianship is not the end of the journey. It is an ongoing task, one that invites every generation to preserve carefully, interpret thoughtfully, and remain open to deeper understanding as the search for truth continues.